The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy streets of downtown as Marcus Thompson stood in front of his wardrobe mirror. Instead of reaching for one of his expensive suits, he pulled out an old brown sweater and a pair of worn khaki pants. At 65 years old, his face carried the wisdom of decades in the banking industry, and his eyes held a determination that had helped him rise from a small-town bank teller to the owner of Thompson Financial Group. Marcus had a different plan for today. 3 months ago, he had bought several branches of Regional Trust Bank, but something didn't feel right. The reports coming in showed that minority customers were leaving the bank in high numbers, especially from the main downtown branch. As someone who had faced discrimination throughout his career, Marcus believed in seeing things with his own eyes. "Are you sure about this, sir?" asked Michael, his driver of 15 years, as Marcus walked out of his mansion wearing the old clothes. Even his normally neat gray hair was slightly messy today. "Sometimes, Michael, the only way to know the truth is to become invisible," Marcus replied, picking up a scratched leather briefcase he had kept from his early days. "Drop me 2 blocks from the downtown branch. And remember, today, I'm just another customer." Michael shook his head but smiled. He had seen his boss do unexpected things before, and they usually led to important changes. The car moved smoothly through the morning traffic, weaving between the tall buildings that made up the financial district. As they drove, Marcus thought about his journey. He remembered being the only black employee at his first banking job, how people would assume he was a janitor instead of a teller. But he had turned that pain into purpose, working twice as hard, earning every promotion, and finally building his own banking empire that put customer service and equality first. The car stopped 2 blocks from the bank. Marcus stepped out, adjusted his old sweater, and started walking. The sidewalks were busy with people hurrying to work, most in sharp business suits. A few bumped into him without apologizing, some clutched their bags tighter as he passed. Marcus noted every reaction, remembering similar experiences from his younger days. The main branch of what was now his bank stood impressive and intimidating, all glass and polished stone. Marcus had seen photos, but in person, it felt even more unwelcoming. 2 security guards stood at the entrance, their eyes following him as he approached. One shifted slightly, hand moving closer to his radio. Inside, the bank was like a palace. Marble floors shone under bright lights, and comfortable leather chairs filled the waiting area. Several customers sat there, all of them white, all of them being attended to promptly by smiling bank employees. Marcus noticed how the employees' eyes would skip over him as they looked for their next customer. He joined the line for the tellers, standing behind a woman in an expensive business suit who immediately took a small step forward, creating more space between them. Marcus pulled out his phone and pretended to check messages while actually taking mental notes of everything he observed. The line moved slowly, but Marcus was patient. He watched how other customers were greeted, how quickly their needs were met, how warmly the staff smiled at them. He particularly noticed 2 young bankers at their desks, a man and a woman who seemed to share knowing looks whenever certain customers approached. Finally, it was almost his turn. Marcus had walked into this bank as a customer, but he carried with him the experience of a CEO, the wisdom of his years, and most importantly, the memory of every time he had been judged by his skin color rather than his character. What would happen when he reached the front of the line would either confirm his suspicions or give him hope that times had truly changed. As the teller called next, Marcus stepped forward, his worn briefcase in hand, ready to experience firsthand how his bank treated people who looked like him. The stage was set for a lesson that would change not just this branch, but the entire banking industry's approach to customer service and equality. Marcus stepped up to the teller's window, giving a polite smile as he had done thousands of times before. The young teller, whose name tag read Lisa, barely looked at him as she continued typing on her computer. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat and uninterested. "I'd like to discuss some investment options," Marcus said clearly, placing his old briefcase on the counter. "I have some savings I'd like to grow." Lisa's fingers stopped typing. She looked up at Marcus, then at his worn sweater, then back at her screen. "How much were you thinking of investing?" Her voice carried a hint of doubt. "About $2 million, Marcus replied calmly. He noticed how her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with suspicion. "1 moment, please." Lisa stood up and walked over to the 2 personal bankers sitting at their desks. Marcus watched as she whispered something to them, all three occasionally glancing in his direction. The male banker, James Wilson, approached first, followed by his colleague Sarah Cooper. Neither offered to shake Marcus's hand, something he had seen them do with other customers all morning. "Sir," James said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it sound less like respect and more like sarcasm, "I understand you want to discuss investments." "That's correct." Marcus pulled out some papers from his briefcase. "I've been researching your bank's performance, and I'm interested in your wealth management services." Sarah let out a small laugh that she quickly tried to cover with a cough. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Our wealth management services have certain minimum requirements." "I'm aware of the requirements," Marcus replied. "As I mentioned to your colleague, I'm looking to invest $2 million. James and Sarah exchanged looks. "Could you verify the source of these funds?" James asked, his tone suggesting he didn't believe such funds existed. "Of course, I brought my account statements and—" "Listen," Sarah interrupted, leaning forward and lowering her voice. "There's a check cashing place 3 blocks down. There might be more, appropriate for your needs." Marcus sat straighter in his chair. Several other customers were watching now, some with discomfort, others with what seemed like agreement in their eyes. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Marcus said quietly but firmly. "Sir, I don't think that's necessary," James started, but Marcus cut him off. "I insist." A few minutes later, Bradley Parker, the branch manager, emerged from his office. He was a tall man with graying hair and an expensive suit, walking with the confidence of someone used to having the final word. "Is there a problem here?" Parker asked, directing his question to James and Sarah rather than Marcus. "This gentleman is being difficult," Sarah explained. "We suggested alternative banking options that might better suit his situation." Marcus stood up slowly. "Mr. Parker, I came here today to discuss investment options. Instead, I've been treated with disrespect and prejudice. I'd like to understand if this is your bank's standard practice." Parker's face hardened. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who disrupts our business operations. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call security." "On what grounds?" Marcus asked calmly. "You're causing a disturbance," Parker said loudly enough for everyone to hear. He motioned to the security guards, who started walking over. Marcus looked around the bank. The same security guards who had watched him suspiciously earlier were now approaching with hands on their belts. Other customers were pretending not to watch, some gathering their belongings and moving away as if he were dangerous. As the guards reached him, Marcus noticed the bank's mission statement hanging on the wall behind the counter. "Serving all communities with dignity and respect." The irony wasn't lost on him. "Please come with us, sir," one guard said, reaching for Marcus's arm. Marcus picked up his briefcase and straightened his sweater. "I'll leave," he said quietly, "but I'll be back tomorrow." None of them knew just how true those words were. As he walked out of the bank, Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his executive assistant. "Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. And Sarah, make sure every senior executive is there. It's time for some changes." The next morning arrived with dark clouds hanging over the city. Marcus stood in his walk-in closet, this time choosing his finest black suit, a crisp white shirt, and his lucky red tie, the same one he had worn when he signed the papers to buy this bank 3 months ago. "Everything is ready, sir," his assistant Sarah reported as she entered his office at 8:30 a.m. "All board members and senior executives will be present. The branch manager and those 2 bankers from yesterday are scheduled for their regular morning meeting, so they have no idea what's coming." Marcus nodded, adjusting his gold cufflinks, a gift from his late father who had always told him to fight injustice with dignity. "And the security footage?" "Downloaded and ready to play on the big screen," Sarah confirmed. "We also have statements from 3 other customers who witnessed everything yesterday. They reached out through our customer service line, quite upset about how you were treated." The drive to the bank was quiet. Michael, his driver, kept glancing in the rearview mirror at his boss. He had never seen Marcus looking so serious. Even when making million-dollar deals, Marcus usually had a slight smile on his face, but not today. They arrived at the bank at 8:55 a.m. This time, Marcus walked through the front door accompanied by his entire executive team. 5 men and women of different races, all dressed impeccably in business attire. The same security guards from yesterday straightened up immediately, their faces showing confusion as they recognized Marcus from the day before. The bank had just opened, and James Wilson and Sarah Cooper were at their desks, organizing papers for the day. They didn't look up at first when the group walked in. Bradley Parker was coming out of his office with a coffee mug in his hand. "Good morning," Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying across the marble floor. All three of them looked up at once. The coffee mug slipped from Parker's hand, chattering on the floor. James's mouth fell open, and Sarah Cooper's face turned so pale that her makeup stood out sharply against her skin. "I don't believe we were properly introduced yesterday," Marcus continued, walking towards them. "I'm Marcus Thompson, CEO and owner of Thompson Financial Group, which, as you might not be aware, purchased this bank 3 months ago." The silence in the bank was absolute. Even the early morning customers stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Parker tried to speak first. "Mr. Thompson, there must be some mistake." "Oh, there was definitely a mistake," Marcus agreed, his voice firm but controlled. "Several mistakes, in fact. Shall we review them?" He turned to his assistant. "Sarah, please start the video." On the large screen behind the teller counters, usually used for displaying exchange rates, the security footage from yesterday began to play. Every dismissive look, every condescending word, every moment of discrimination was captured in high definition. "Stop the video," Marcus commanded after a few minutes. He turned to face not just Parker, Wilson, and Cooper, but the entire bank staff who had gathered to watch. "What you just witnessed is a perfect example of why our bank's minority customers have been leaving in droves. This isn't just about yesterday. This is about a culture that needs to change." Parker stepped forward, his face now red. "Sir, I can explain." "No need to explain," Marcus interrupted. "Your actions have done all the explaining necessary." He paused, looking each of them in the eye. "Now you're probably expecting me to fire all of you on the spot." The three bankers seemed to shrink under his gaze. Several other employees looked at the floor, embarrassed by what they had just witnessed. "But that would be too easy," Marcus continued, "and it wouldn't solve the real problem. Instead, I have something else in mind." He turned to his executive team. "Starting today, we're implementing Project Mirror. These three individuals will be the first participants." As Marcus began explaining his plan, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds outside, sending streams of light across the bank's marble floor. It felt like a sign. A new day was truly beginning at Thompson Financial Group, and nothing would ever be the same. The bank's conference room had never felt so crowded. Every seat was taken, with additional chairs brought in from other offices. Marcus stood at the head of the long table, looking at the mix of faces before him, his executive team, the branch employees, and most importantly, Bradley Parker, James Wilson, and Sarah Cooper, who sat uncomfortably in the front row. Project Mirror, Marcus began, is about walking in someone else's shoes. He clicked a button, and images appeared on the screen behind him. They showed people of different races, ages, and backgrounds conducting banking transactions. "For the next 3 months," he continued, "you three will experience banking from the other side. Mr. Parker, starting tomorrow, you'll visit our branches dressed as an elderly black man trying to cash his pension check. Miss Cooper, you'll wear a hijab and attempt to open a business account. Mr. Wilson, you'll pose as a Hispanic customer seeking a home loan." The three bankers shifted in their seats. Sarah Cooper raised her hand timidly. "Sir, is this legal?" Marcus smiled slightly. "More legal than discrimination, Ms. Cooper. But you won't be alone. Each of you will be paired with a community mentor who will guide you through their daily experiences." He nodded to his assistant, who opened the conference room door. 3 people walked in, an elderly black man wearing a worn jacket, a Muslim woman in a beautiful blue hijab, and a middle-aged Hispanic man in work clothes. "Meet Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Ahmad, and Mr. Rodriguez," Marcus said. "They're real customers who left our bank due to discrimination. They've agreed to help teach you what that feels like." Bradley Parker's face had turned red again. "Mr. Thompson, I've been in banking for 20 years. I don't need to." 20 years of doing things wrong doesn't make them right," Marcus interrupted firmly. "But I'm offering you a chance to learn how to do them better." He walked around the table, stopping near the 3 bankers. Every week, you'll visit different branches with your mentors. You'll document every interaction, every look, every word. You'll learn how it feels to be treated as other in a place that should welcome everyone equally. James Wilson raised his hand next. And if we refuse? Then you're welcome to seek employment elsewhere, Marcus replied calmly. But good luck explaining why you left Thompson Financial Group. The video of yesterday's incident will be part of our new training program. The room fell silent. Marcus continued, but this isn't just about you three. Every employee in this branch will participate in sensitivity training, and starting next month, we're implementing mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds who will regularly test our service quality. He turned to the rest of the staff. Anyone who witnesses discrimination but stays silent is part of the problem. We're installing a new anonymous reporting system. Use it. Sarah Cooper had tears in her eyes now. I never thought. I didn't realize. Mrs. Ahmad stepped forward, her hijab catching the morning light. That's why we're here, she said softly. To help you realize. Marcus watched as Mr. Johnson walked over to Bradley Parker and held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Parker stood and shook it. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something important. One more thing, Marcus added. Each of you will develop and lead a community outreach program. You'll work with local organizations to understand the financial needs of underserved communities. Your performance in this project will determine your future with this bank. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, Marcus noticed something interesting. The three mentors were already talking with their assigned bankers, sharing stories and experiences. Sarah Cooper was listening intently as Mrs. Ahmad described the challenges of running a small business while wearing a hijab. James Wilson was writing down notes as Mr. Rodriguez explained how language barriers affected banking relationships. Marcus's assistant approached him. Sir, the press will want to know about this. How should we handle it? Marcus watched as Bradley Parker helped Mr. Johnson with his coat, a simple act of respect that would have seemed impossible yesterday. Tell them nothing for now, he replied. Real change doesn't need an audience. It needs commitment. 1 month into Project Mirror, the changes were already visible. The downtown branch of Thompson Financial Group looked different. The stark marble walls now displayed photographs of diverse customers and employees, and signs in multiple languages welcomed visitors. But the real changes were happening with the people inside. Bradley Parker stood in front of his bathroom mirror, carefully applying the special makeup that would transform him into Mr. James Washington, an elderly black man trying to access his retirement savings. His hands shook slightly as he remembered his first date in disguise. I never knew, he whispered to his reflection. I never knew how it felt to have security guards follow me around, or to see people move away when I sat down. Across town, Sarah Cooper was preparing for her day too. She adjusted her hijab with growing confidence, having learned the proper way from Mrs. Ahmad. The first time she had worn it, she had felt strange and uncomfortable. Now, after experiencing countless stares and whispered comments while wearing it, she understood something deeper about courage. Ready for today? Mrs. Ahmad asked as they met outside the bank's West Side branch. As ready as I'll ever be, Sarah replied. Today's task was to apply for a business loan while wearing the hijab. She had watched Mrs. Ahmad get rejected 3 times last year for similar loans, despite having perfect credit. Meanwhile, James Wilson was sitting in a small cafe with Mr. Rodriguez, practicing his Spanish. He had spent the past month visiting banks as Carlos Mendez, a construction worker seeking to buy his first home. The experience had opened his eyes to how language barriers could make even simple transactions feel overwhelming. Remember, Mr. Rodriguez said, sipping his coffee, today you're not just speaking broken English, you're carrying the dreams of your family with you. Back at the main branch, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the weekly reports from Project Mirror. Each participant had to document their experiences in detail, recording how they were treated and how it made them feel. The reports had started out defensive and shallow, but they were changing. He picked up Bradley's latest entry. Day 23. Visited the North Branch as Mr. Washington. Waited 45 minutes while younger customers were served first. Remembered how I used to let this happen in my own branch. The shame is hard to carry. Mr. Johnson helped me understand that the pain of being dismissed doesn't get easier with age. You just learn to hide it better. I can't change my past actions, but I can change what happens next. Sarah's report was equally revealing. Day 25. 3 people refused to sit next to me on the bank's waiting room chairs. A teller asked me to remove my hijab for security purposes, even though Mrs. Ahmad had taught me this was against religious rights. I used to think Muslim women were just being difficult when they complained about these things. I've never been so wrong in my life. And James had written. Day 28. Tried to explain in broken English that I had all the documents for a home loan. The banker spoke loudly and slowly, like I was stupid instead of just speaking another language. Remembered doing the same thing myself and felt sick. Mr. Rodriguez squeezed my shoulder and said, "Now you understand." I do. Finally, I do. Marcus's assistant knocked on his door. "Sir, the community outreach programs are ready to launch." The 3 of them designed everything themselves. Marcus smiled as he looked at the proposals. Bradley had created a financial literacy program for senior citizens in predominantly minority neighborhoods. Sarah had developed a special business loan program for women entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds. James had designed a multilingual banking app to help non-English speakers navigate financial services. "They're getting it," Marcus said softly. "They're finally getting it." Outside his office, he could hear the regular buzz of bank business. But now there was something different in the air. He watched through his window as Bradley, dressed as Mr. Washington, waited in line at his own branch. A young teller who didn't know his true identity called him forward with a warm smile and pulled out a chair for him. Small steps, Marcus thought, but real ones. The bank was changing, one person at a time, one day at a time, and somehow, ironically, it had taken 3 acts of discrimination to start a revolution of compassion. 3 months had passed since the start of Project Mirror, and the downtown branch was hosting a special evening event. The banking hall had been transformed with chairs arranged in rows, and a small stage stood where the teller windows usually were. The room was packed with bank employees from all branches, community members, and local business owners. Marcus sat in the back row, watching proudly as Bradley Parker walked up to the podium. Gone was the arrogant branch manager who had called security on him that day. In his place stood a changed man, his face showing the weight of the lessons he had learned. "Good evening, everyone," Bradley began, his voice slightly shaky. 3 months ago, I was a different person. I thought I knew everything about banking, but I knew nothing about people." He paused, looking at Mr. Johnson sitting in the front row. "Through Project Mirror, I learned what it feels like to be judged, dismissed, and disrespected. I learned that the pain of discrimination doesn't show up on any balance sheet, but its cost is enormous." Sarah Cooper stood up next, walking to join Bradley at the podium. She wore a pin on her blazer that Mrs. Ahmad had given her, a small crescent moon that symbolized their growing friendship. "When Mr. Thompson first announced this project, I thought it was a punishment," Sarah admitted to the audience. "I was wrong. It was an awakening." She turned to Mrs. Ahmad and smiled. "Walking in someone else's shoes, or in my case, wearing someone else's hijab, taught me that true banking isn't just about money. It's about dignity, respect, and understanding." James Wilson was the last to speak. He carried a thick folder with him, the Spanish-language banking guides he had created with Mr. Rodriguez's help. "These past months, I've been Carlos Mendez, a construction worker trying to buy a home," James explained. "I felt the frustration of not being understood, the shame of being talked down to, and the anger of being denied opportunities." He opened the folder and held up the guides. "But I've also learned that we can fix this, one step at a time." The 3 of them then revealed their community projects. Bradley showed videos of his senior financial literacy classes, where elderly customers of all backgrounds learned about managing their retirement funds together. The students in the videos were smiling, comfortable, and engaged, a far cry from the fearful seniors who used to rush through their transactions. Sarah presented her Women Entrepreneurs program, which had already approved 15 business loans to diverse applicants. Mrs. Ahmad stood up to share how her small business had grown with the program's help, and how she was now mentoring other women entrepreneurs. James demonstrated his multilingual banking app, which Mr. Rodriguez had helped test and improve. The app could now help customers in 6 different languages, making banking services accessible to more people than ever before. As the presentations ended, Marcus finally walked to the stage. The room fell silent. Many people were still in awe of how his undercover visit had sparked all these changes. "When I walked into this branch 3 months ago," he began, "I saw a problem. But today, I see a solution. I see bankers who have learned to see people, not just customers. I see community members who trust us again. I see change." He gestured to Bradley, Sarah, and James. These three could have quit when faced with Project Mirror. Instead, they chose to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. Their probation period is over, but their work is just beginning. Marcus then revealed the next phase of his plan. Project Mirror would be implemented across all Thompson Financial Group branches nationwide. Bradley, Sarah, and James would lead the training teams, sharing their experiences and teaching other bankers the lessons they had learned. Banking isn't just about protecting wealth, Marcus concluded. It's about protecting human dignity, and that starts with understanding each other. After the event, as people mingled and shared stories, Marcus watched his three former problem employees deep in conversation with their mentors. Bradley was helping Mr. Johnson organize the next senior citizens workshop. Sarah and Mrs. Ahmad were reviewing applications from new entrepreneurs. James and Mr. Rodriguez were discussing updates to the banking app. The bank's mission statement still hung on the wall: serving all communities with dignity and respect. But now, finally, they were truly living up to those words. 6 months after the first Project Mirror graduation, Marcus Thompson sat in his office reviewing a stack of newspapers. Headlines from across the country told the story of how his small experiment was changing the banking industry. Thompson Financial Group reports 50% increase in minority customers. Revolutionary banking program fights discrimination through experience. From bias to bridge building, how one bank changed its culture. His assistant knocked on the door, carrying a tablet with more good news. "Sir, the numbers from the national rollout are in. 20 branches have completed Project Mirror, with another 30 starting next month." Marcus smiled, remembering how it had all started with just 3 reluctant bankers. Now Bradley, Sarah, and James were traveling across the country, sharing their stories and training other banking professionals. Their transformation had become an inspiration for the entire industry. Today, they were all gathering at the downtown branch again, but this time for a different reason. The branch was hosting its first community banking fair, an idea that had come from Bradley's experiences as Mr. Washington. Marcus walked down to the banking hall, which had been transformed into a welcoming space with information booths, refreshment tables, and conversation areas. The stiff formality of traditional banking was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was a warm, community atmosphere that made everyone feel at home. Bradley Parker was at the senior services booth, his gray hair now natural rather than part of a disguise. He was sitting with a group of elderly customers, patiently explaining retirement options in clear, simple terms. Mr. Johnson sat beside him, adding his own insights and helping to make everyone feel comfortable. "You know," Bradley said to a visitor, "I learned that banking isn't about rushing through transactions. It's about taking time to understand each person's needs and dreams." Across the room, Sarah Cooper was running the Women Entrepreneurs Corner. She wore a beautiful scarf that Mrs. Ahmad had given her, not as a disguise now, but as a symbol of friendship and understanding. Together, they were helping a group of women fill out business loan applications. "Remember," Sarah told them, "your ideas matter, your dreams matter, and we're here to help you achieve them." The wall behind her displayed photos of successful businesses that had grown through their program, including Mrs. Ahmad's shop, which had now expanded to 3 locations. James Wilson was demonstrating the bank's multilingual services, which had grown far beyond the original app. The bank now offered documents in 12 languages, and their staff included speakers of most local community languages. Mr. Rodriguez stood proudly beside him, watching as James switched effortlessly between English and Spanish to help customers. "Banking shouldn't have language barriers," James explained to a reporter. "Money speaks every language, and so should we." Marcus watched as customers moved freely through the space, asking questions without fear, sharing stories, and building relationships with their bankers. The change wasn't just in policies or programs, it was in the very air of the place. A young banker from another bank approached Marcus. "Mr. Thompson," she said hesitantly, "our management team was wondering if you would consider sharing Project Mirror with other banks. We've seen the impact it's had." Marcus nodded. That's exactly what we're planning next. Bradley, Sarah, and James are developing a training program that any bank can use. Because this isn't about competitive advantage, it's about making banking better for everyone. Later that afternoon, Marcus gathered his original team together in the conference room where Project Mirror had begun. Bradley, Sarah, and James sat with their mentors, looking back on how far they had come. Did you ever imagine, Marcus asked them, that being caught in an act of discrimination would lead to all this? Sarah shook her head. We were the problem, she said quietly, but you turned us into part of the solution. The real solution, Bradley added, was helping us see people as people, not just customers or numbers. James nodded. And now we get to help others see that too. Outside the conference room, the community banking fair was still in full swing. The sound of different languages, laughter, and genuine conversation filled the air. The bank's mission statement had been updated with a new line below it, because everyone's story matters. Marcus looked at his team, not just employees now, but true agents of change. Ready to change the whole industry, he asked. Their confident smiles told him they were ready for anything. 1 year had passed since that fateful day when Marcus Thompson walked into his bank dressed in old clothes. The downtown branch looked very different now. The cold marble walls had been softened with community artwork, and the space buzzed with the energy of people from all walks of life feeling truly welcome. Marcus stood in the same spot where he had once been asked to leave. Today, he was here for a special ceremony. The American Banking Association had chosen Thompson Financial Group for their first ever Banking Excellence in Community Service Award. But that wasn't the only reason this day was special. The banking hall was filled with familiar faces. In the front row sat Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Ahmad, and Mr. Rodriguez, the three mentors who had helped change everything. Behind them were dozens of bank employees, community members, and even representatives from other banks who had adopted Project Mirror. Bradley Parker stepped up to the podium first. His face had gained new laugh lines over the past year, earned from countless genuine smiles shared with customers of all backgrounds. A year ago, he began, I was the worst kind of banker, one who judged books by their covers. Today, I'm proud to announce that our senior financial literacy program has helped over 1,000 elderly customers from all communities take control of their retirement planning. Sarah Cooper spoke next, standing confidently in a beautiful outfit that combined traditional business wear with a hijab, her own style that reflected her journey of understanding. Last year, I thought I knew what a successful banker looked like, she said, smiling at Mrs. Ahmad. Now I know that success comes in all forms. Our Women Entrepreneurs program has funded 200 new businesses, creating jobs and opportunities across every community in our city. James Wilson took the stage with his young daughter in his arms. She was wearing a t-shirt that read Future Banker in both English and Spanish. Mi familia, he began in Spanish, before switching to English. My family taught me that language should connect, not divide. Today, our multilingual banking services help customers in 15 languages, and we're adding more every month. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He looked out at the crowd, remembering how this journey began with one act of discrimination that he turned into an opportunity for change. A year ago, I walked into this bank dressed differently to test our service, he said. Today, we don't need such tests anymore, because we've learned that clothes don't make the customer, character does. And speaking of character, Marcus waved Bradley, Sarah, and James forward. These three individuals could have resigned when faced with their mistakes. Instead, they chose to learn, grow, and help others do the same. Today, I'm proud to announce their promotions to our executive leadership team, where they will continue to champion diversity and inclusion across our entire organization. The crowd erupted in applause. Mr. Johnson wiped tears from his eyes as he watched Bradley accept his new position. Mrs. Ahmad clasped her hands in joy as Sarah received her executive badge. Mr. Rodriguez cheered loudly when James stepped forward. But Marcus wasn't finished. Project Mirror has now been adopted by 50 banks across the country. But today, we're taking it even further. Thompson Financial Group is establishing the Banking Equality Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting discrimination in banking nationwide. He revealed the Institute's logo on the screen, a mirror reflecting diverse faces, with the motto, Banking for All, beneath it. The institute will be led by our original mentors, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Ahmad, and Mr. Rodriguez, working alongside Bradley, Sarah, and James. Together, they will help other banks learn what we learned. That true banking is about serving all people with dignity and respect. As the ceremony ended and people mingled, Marcus watched his transformed team. Bradley was showing Mr. Johnson his new office, already planning more senior outreach programs. Sarah and Mrs. Ahmad were discussing expanding the Women Entrepreneurs Program nationwide. James and Mr. Rodriguez were demonstrating the latest version of their banking app to visitors from other banks. A young reporter approached Marcus. "Did you ever imagine that pretending to be a mistreated customer would lead to all this?" Marcus smiled, watching as a diverse group of customers entered the bank, each one greeted with genuine warmth and respect. "Sometimes," he replied, "the best way to fix a broken system is to experience its flaws firsthand. But the real victory isn't in exposing the problem, it's in people choosing to be part of the solution." Above them, the bank's mission statement had been updated one final time: serving all communities with dignity and respect. Because every person's story matters, every person's dreams count, and every person deserves a chance to succeed.